The yearly increase in Nigeria's domestic debt has become a major source of concern, given the yearly corresponding rise in its external debt. The country's domestic debt grew by 62.5% from December 2015 to December 2019, as total domestic debt rose to 20 trillion naira as of September 2020, compared to 19.6 trillion naira as of June 2020, as public debt stock continued to trend upwards with a jump from 7.6 trillion naira, that's about $48.7 billion in 2012, to 32.9 trillion naira. That's about $86.8 billion in 2020. While external borrowings in recent times started gaining momentum as it surged from 1 trillion naira, 14% of total debt in 2012, to 12.7 trillion naira, 37% of total debt in 2020. As Nigeria expects to borrow more in 2021, economic experts are of the view that extensive use of borrowing has a severe implication on the economy, as it can negatively affect capital stock accumulation and hinder economic growth via heightened long-term interest rates, while having unpleasant ramifications for the strength of the economy in trade. And to discuss this more, I have joining us live via Zoom is the Director of Research at Debt Management Roundtable of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, Dr. Olusegun Omisakin. Good afternoon, Dr. Omisakin.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm going to start straight this way. Why do you think Nigeria's domestic debt burden is heavier than its external debt?
Well, in terms of the ratio, of course, presently you have Nigeria doing around 60% of its total debt coming from domestic sources. And this is, of course, very, very obvious. You see a situation where the country can just issue out the treasury bill, bonds, and the rest, and people can quickly, subscribe to this compared to where you have to get involved with encouraging the multilaterals or commercial loans, especially from outside. And then given the fact that you also be faced with the exchange rate challenge. So it's, of course, obvious why in the case of the Nigerian debt profile, you have more doing domestically. It's also good in the sense that you are not really being exposed to any external shocks, especially when it concerns the value of naira to dollar EU that will always be battling with.
Now, if Nigeria's debt to GDP ratio is still below the IMF's 70% benchmark, I'm thinking, why do we now have a worry about a possible debt crisis?
Yeah, I think this is another time for us. We've been saying this at the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, and I think I will want to re-emphasize this. You see, when the IMF talks about different indicators of debts, one of them is using the GDP or revenue or so many other indicators, exports and the rest. IMF's benchmarks are actually being directed towards solvency. In other words, would you, as a country, in this case Nigeria, be able to pay back what you are owing multilaterals or your people or the other private institutions outside of your country? So the issue with the IMF or any other international body is not about how the debt burden on you affects your macro stability and hence affects your total health of your country. It's purely on would you be able to pay back. And the assumption of saying debt to GDP, we are still doing fine. Obviously, yes, we are still doing fine. But the point is, we assume the basic assumption is that when your GDP is doing fine, when you are growing, there is this possibility that you'll be able to collect more taxes, more revenue, and the rest. And this is a universal benchmark. But in the case of Nigeria, especially countries that are resource-based, we are not getting the huge part of our revenue from government. It's not from taxes. Yes, of recent the government is trying, and again because the oil price has been doing badly over time. The moment we are coming up now from the oil market, you will see that most of our revenue sources will be basically based on the oil revenue. So the argument of we are doing fine, we are below 70-10, it's not tenable when we are talking about the macro impact, macro stability of the economy with respect to, to debt. I mean, for instance, we are doing about 80 or 90, more than 90% when you compare that with our capacity to generate, revenue. So let me ask you this question. When you cannot pay back the debt, or you use the whole revenue that you are getting to pay to service your debt, nobody needs to tell you that something is wrong. Yes, your GDP, your economy might be big, but government will don't use GDP to pay back these debts. GDP is basically the income of the people, the private sectors, the economic activities. It doesn't belong to the government, so it belongs to the people, and it's not the people that will come and be paying for the Nigerian government. So what Nigeria needs to emphasize is the importance of revenue to debt servicing, and that's what we think this discussion around debt roundtable will be able to provide more insights into.
Before I go to my next question, I also like to ask that if you agree to that sentiment that some say that it depends on what you use the monies borrowed for, you can as well go on to borrow. Do you also agree that if the monies are channeled to maybe productive sectors, like we've seen to develop infrastructure and some other things, maybe we could do better than what we're doing now?
Nigeria is a living example of the empirical results for that statement. We are already there now. It doesn't matter what or how we use the money. We are already there now. We are using the taxpayers. We are going to end up using the taxpayers' money, then borrowing again to pay our debt if care is not taken. You remember, if you look at the total debts, Nigeria happens to be doing, according to the DMR, we are doing around 33 trillion naira. But if you look at the report from the IMF, which also includes other sources of debt from HAMCOM, from the CBN Ways and Means, we are doing around 54 trillion naira, and that is huge. So in this case, the debate of, it doesn't matter, it's what you use it for, we have gone past that. What we are talking to now is, should we keep folding our hands and we keep borrowing until we have no capacity to even pay again? Or do we start conversations around alternative financing? Do we talk about the traditional ways of financing? Do we talk about our sources of revenue? Do we talk about the issue of efficiency? Do we talk about the issue of sustainability? Do we talk about the issue of why do we need to be going at that level? So it's not just about what you use it for. In some cases, yes. And that theory follows basically most of the experiences of the developed countries, in the sense that they have strong institutions that make sure that what you borrow is why you borrow, is where you are using it for. But in the case of Nigeria, we have gone past that. I think the emphasis now should be on how do we arrest this situation in the short to medium term? How do we pay back? How do we make sure that we are not doing around 90 plus with respect to our revenue to debt service? But we are doing something far lower than that. Then we can then talk about sustainability. We can talk about alternative sources of funding for government. We can talk about issues that are maybe selling government assets or not. We can just talk about something that will look more sustainable for Nigeria in the long run. Because the trend is not just about accumulation of debt. The trend or the speed of accumulation also matters now. We are moving at a very high speed, and if care is not taken, we may need to borrow to pay other people that we are owing, and that will not be the best for our macro stability.
Now, let's look at the economic implications that we could expect if Nigeria's current propensity for domestic debt is sustained. Did you hear me, Dr. Omisakin?
Yes, I can hear you. So whether it's a domestic or foreign, of course, domestic is even having a very large actually of the thing. So number one, let's trace why government borrows, what government wants to use the money for, and how government pays it back. If government's revenue or the capacity to pay back the domestic borrowing is challenged, what happens is that the government might begin to, in quote, use our mine and yours taxes to pay back, and not just as simple as using them. And this is how this will play out. Our government expenditure on maybe capital expenditure and the rest, government might begin to reduce that. government budget will suffer. In other words, government will begin to spend less. One, government will begin to earn more by opening up different other ways of collecting money, whether it's toll gate or whether any other sources of generating money from the people. And that, of course, will affect the consumption of the people, will affect their savings, and ultimately will affect the high demand and supply, and eventually it will have a huge weight on the economy. And of course, our economy is even fragile now. So that's, nobody prays for that consequences.
Now let's start moving on. Move on now. As you were talking, I get to put together that I'm worried why government is not also taking solid steps, or if you like, concrete steps to boost internal revenue options. We talk many times about looking inwards. How well at this? What do you think is happening with regards to that? Are we really looking inwards to take advantage of what we have to boost internal revenue?
Yeah, first of all, with all sincerity, I think the government taking some steps that we all need to also acknowledge. But we can't. The government cannot stop at that. The more if you want to tackle any challenge, it doesn't matter the efforts you've taken so far. What people want to see, whether you have been able to overcome the problem. While we personally acknowledge, of course, the government is trying one way or the other. But the big challenge is there, and we think that until we are able to discuss what really matters, what maybe people don't want to hear, or what we think is so huge for us, we won't get out of this. How long will the government be able to be the main financier in this case? The government cannot, on its own, begin to drive investment, get the money through taxation and the rest. If we have foreign direct investment that is so challenged and that is so low, there is no way government can get revenue from this. There is no way the business activities will grow. So I think basically you have minor or some consistent issues that government is looking into. But we need to look at another measures within the scope and the context of how do we finance this particular problem, this particular debt. How do we generate revenue, at least for now, to make sure that we don't continue this trend. And I tell you, I've already said some measures. For instance, apart from making sure that we integrate our informal sector, informal economy, the government can also look into the use of transparency and efficiency within its own sector, which the people are really expecting, so that you don't put on this weight on the household or the private sector alone. Also, the government can look at some debt assets. Do we continue to roll in with this, or how best do we approach that? So many other options are there, but the fact eventually is that we need to tackle this problem. We can't be doing 54 trillion naira, and when we think we'll just be doing small, giving small approaches. We need to move, and make sure that we solve this problem so that it doesn't become a larger problem tomorrow.
Now, from all economic indications, is it advisable for Nigeria, in straight terms, now I'm focusing on Nigeria, to continue to incur more domestic debt, of course, to fulfill social contract with the citizens? Do you think that is workable at this time?
I don't think so. We are already skewed towards that domestic debt. We can, and there's extent to which you can keep getting domestic debts and the rest. There is this, you can't do beyond the capacity of the people, the capacity of the economy, because that's what also will reflect on the availability of funds for you. So the debates now shouldn't even be about whether domestic or foreign. I think the debate should look into how do we downplay the momentum? How do we make sure that we don't keep going on like this? I think that's the most important thing. We've been doing fine with 60% of our total debt being sourced, domestically. That's good enough. At least we are not trying to expose ourselves to foreign shocks, and we've done that successfully. But it wouldn't matter eventually if the aggregate debt is getting to that level where we cannot even repay with our revenue. I think that's the main issue.
So let's now look at specific suggestions. That's talking about the DMR. What specific suggestions are you preferring to help government manage, of course, possible tackle this domestic debt conundrum?
Yes, first of all, the exercise or the project is still ongoing. I know NESG, we don't just come up and say, oh, government should do that. We need to do a kind of a stakeholder engagement, even meeting with the government. We are engaging DMO, we are looking at the issues here and there. And so you are not going to see a kind of something entirely new, model, but we are going to see a more deliberate, pragmatic approach to helping government into solving this problem. And I would also like to share more of our policy recommendations when we get to that level. But what we are doing presently is to look out for issues that we think will eventually solve the problem, not just basically, do this, do that. We've been doing that, but how do we do it better? How do we do it in a way that makes better sense, or that will make bigger impact, especially again, given the size of the debts of Nigeria, when you look at it from the regional level, ECOWAS, what will likely be the implication on the ECOWAS economy if we end up being in debt crisis? How would that? So the debate here is not just about Nigeria; it's also about the region of ECOWAS.
Before I let you go, well said. I must say, Dr. Omisakin. But some inflows to also continue to come in, and it's like some more monies to boost our reserves. Even the reserve rose by about $500 million in just 1 week. So maybe the country could also be saying, well, reserves are getting better, so a little bit of stability. Do you think that can also fuel that interest in getting more loans?
Yes, but we also need to do far better than we are doing with reserve. What we are getting anytime you have this slight increase is we are still using it to take care of the gap. The CBN is struggling with the exchange rate funding here and there, pushing the money into some sectors, pushing the money, rationing the money, the credit here and there. That in itself shows that we are not doing fine. So it doesn't really matter the marginal increase or decrease. The main point now is that we need to do much more. We need to make sure that the country is inviting for the private sector. We need to look into why is it that we don't get what we need to do, what we need to get to run the system. We need to make sure that the government looks into all those private sector sources, to drive the system better, much more than what we are doing now. So it's a good thing, but historically, that has not really answered the major problem of debt servicing in Nigeria.
It's a good way to leave it. Thank you very much, Director of Research at the Debt Management Roundtable of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, NESG's Dr. Olusegun Omisakin. It's really good to see you. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on this very important topic.
Thank you very much. Thank you.